And I'm sick. You know when you feel fine one day and you wake up the next morning and just everything hurts? Yeah, that's where I'm at today. I think that's a good enough excuse to do a video in my pajamas. I am sick, which is not super fun around exam time, but it is a good excuse to do nothing but lie in bed and read all day, so I thought I would cheer myself up today by doing a really interesting tag video. This is the 20th century book tag, which is originally from Words of a Reader, so I'll leave her original video down below. The rules of the tag are pretty simple. You've just got to go through your bookshelves and pick out one book that was published during each decade of the 20th century. I started out this one just picking out books that I'd read, but I was actually able to pick some of my very favourite books. I genuinely adore all the books that I'm going to mention today, so I think it goes without saying that I recommend them all really highly. I actually ended up picking quite a lot of children's literature for this list. I guess for me, kids lit is just something that's endlessly enjoyable no matter when it was written. For the 1900s, I found The Wizard of Oz by Frank L. Baum. This is the first book and obviously the most well known in the Oz series. This one's my favourite out of the whole series, but I have read all of them and they're pretty interesting books. They're much kookier and weirder than the movie makes them out to be, but the characters are all really lovely. I never thought I'd be emotionally attached to a character called Jack Pumpkinhead. For the 1910s, I picked The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I can't count the number of times I've read this one, easily 20 or 30 times. We even got to read it as a class in year 6 and I just nerded out about it the entire time. I think we paid 30 cents for this one from a secondhand bookshop and it's been worth that money 1,000 times over. For the 1920s, I picked the last book that I finished reading and what probably is the most obvious choice for the 1920s, especially at the moment. That's The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I've read this one quite a few times now and just love it absolutely to pieces. F. Scott Fitzgerald just has this wonderful way with words and he can make these arrogant and selfish and jealous people almost have like a magical quality to them. I adore it. I love it so much. Even though this particular one has fallen apart. I guess that just means I get to treat myself with a brand new copy. The 1940s, I've chosen 1984 by George Orwell. I actually have 2 editions of this one, which is How Much I Love It, but this copy is just absolutely beautiful the whole way round. 1984 is one of my favourite classics, the precursor to basically every dystopian book ever published. If you're a fan of dystopian, I would definitely recommend checking this one out, as long as you go into it knowing that it's not going to be like a YA dystopian book. It can be quite a hard read in places, but I definitely think it's worth your time. The title I've chosen for the 50s is in quite a similar vein to 1984, and that's Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is also dystopian. It's set in a world where books are burned, not read, and I think it provides a really interesting perspective on the whole banned books debate. My choice for the 1960s is the only non-fiction title on this list, and that's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This is an autobiography and it's desperately sad in some places, so I wouldn't read it on public transport like I chose to. Mistake. But it's just so wonderful and written with such an amazing sense of hope. Maya Angelou is an amazing writer and I really can't wait to read more by her. For the 1970s, I've picked a book that inspired one of my favourite movies, and that's The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I absolutely adored the Princess Bride movie growing up, how fantastical it is and how clever it is with the use of language and storytelling, and this book is just that times 10. It's a satirical take on every adventure tale ever told, so it's really witty, but there's also some pretty powerful messages about love and friendship in here. It's not as fast-paced as the movie and it does tend to drag a little bit in certain places, but I think every writer has something to learn from William Goldman and the way that he controls his characters and uses the absolute perfect language to get his meaning across. For the 80s, I've chosen Playing Beatty Bo by Ruth Park. She does historical fiction like no one I've ever read before. It's so fun and immersive and genuinely made me want to learn about the time period she was writing in. This is about a girl who, while playing a game with a bunch of children, gets sent back in time to Sydney in the 1800s. I haven't read this one for quite a few years, but as far as I remember, she is one of the whiniest and most annoying characters in any book ever written. But the storytelling is wonderful and it's also host to one of my first fictional crushes. Yeah. Judah. I remember sitting in class when we were reading this and just sighing wistfully over his long, luscious hair. And the last book is from the 1990s. This is also an Australian children's book. That's All in the Blue Unclouded Weather by Robin Klein. Robin Klein was one of my absolute favourite authors growing up. I've read all of her books many, many times. This book is the first in a trilogy about the 4 Melling sisters and their cousins, and just has so much nostalgia in it for me. It's set in a regional town in post-war Australia. This book is kind of half the childhood that I had and half the childhood that I wished I had. It's all just a lot of innocent fun. They spend a lot of time climbing trees and lying in the sun and, patching up their pantyhose with different materials, and it's just so relaxing to read about. I don't know if it's possible to be nostalgic for a time you never lived in, but this book just makes me want to climb inside the world and just be a kid again. So those are my 10 books. I thought I was going to have a bit of difficulty with this one, but it was actually pretty easy for me to find books from most of the decades. This tag was genuinely really interesting to do. I think it's kind of important for us as readers to really look at our bookshelves every now and again and examine what sort of books we've been reading. I find that when I feel like I'm in a reading slump, it's often because I've been reading the same sorts of books for a little while without much variation. And looking at my shelves here, I mean, I have so much choice for both genre and time period that if I ever feel like I'm in a slump, it should be pretty easy for me to change up what I'm reading. Or just in general, I think part of being a reader is wanting to explore different worlds, and if we're only reading the same sort of book over and over again, we're really missing out on all those worlds out there. I loved going through my shelves and looking at all the possibilities that existed in my book collection, and I think I'm going to challenge myself this year to read a little bit more outside my comfort zone. Alright, that's it for today. Again, I will leave the link to Words of a Reader's original video down below. I think everyone should do this tag. It was really interesting to look through my collection and see how varied my book tastes could be. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!